Hey guys, Modsy here, back with another retro history video. We're going to be looking at a card that's got a rather special place in my history of video cards. And the card I'm going to be talking about is the GTX 460. Now, very recently I put out the cinematic that I would have normally actually cut into this video as a part of my format for how I did these history videos. However, I originally had this video planned to be released over a month ago, but things kept coming up and I ran into some difficulty and ran into some decisions about wanting to change it, and of course then Nvidia moved all of the Fermi cards across to legacy support, and then I decided to go back to the drawing board with the script again and what I wanted to do in terms of talking about it. And in the end I decided to change up the format and how I want to do these history videos in the future, because I'm not going to have quite as much time to focus on these videos, especially with the cinematic side of things that I do want to keep trying to do. I'm probably going to release those as separate, like just videos on their own, so just looking at B-roll footage of the cards and things like that. And of course I will cut some of that footage into this video as well. So I want to explain to you guys why I decided to call the GTX 460 my favorite Fermi card. Well, back in 2009 I was playing Battlefield Bad Company 2. Absolutely loving that game. I had a Core 2 Duo system that had an E6850 that overclocked like a champ. It ran at like, I think 3 point something gigahertz, 3 point something, I can't remember. It was really nice, liquid cooled as well. And I'll put a photo of my case up on screen for you guys to see the really cool little Resident Evil style double helix reservoir that I had in there. I had a really nice DFI motherboard. It was a micro ATX board. I had it in like an Antec P180 mini case that I had modified to change the orientation of the drive cages around, all that sort of stuff. But I had this card in that system, and that was a ATI Radeon. It was an XFX Model 1. It was a HD 5770 XXX edition card that ran at... I'm going to look at the back of the card here, so I apologize. It ran at 875 megahertz, or the 875M model. Decided that I would get a new CPU, new motherboard, new RAM, and new video card. In fact, new power supply, new SSD. I pretty much did a whole new resystem build at the time. I went for a 2500K on a ASRock motherboard. It was a pretty cheap motherboard at the time. It was like, I think it was the Z68 Extreme 3 Gen 3. But for the video card, I ended up picking up a GTX 460, and really glad I did. It was a really nice card. It did have quite a bit of performance boost over the 5770, especially with the new system, that is. Because, I mean, the Core 2 Duo that I had in 2009 was outdated even then. Of course, you had the early i5s and i7s that were around. Basically, I decided to get a second 460. It was running so well. The Australian dollar was doing so nicely against the American dollar, and cards were at a real all-time low in terms of their price. So I picked up a second 460, and oh my god, was I in for a treat. Let me give you a bit of a history about the 460. So the 460, or the 400 range in general, released, and it was all the journalists were going crazy over how hot and how crazily hot the 470 and the 480 was when they launched. And the 460 came along, and suddenly there was this like holy grail light moment where this was the card to get, because not only did it run cooler than the other two cards, if you were planning to only get a single 470 or a single 480, all the reviewers were saying, no, get two 460s, because at even reference speed, the two 460s were beating a GTX 480. Hands down, across the board, they were beating a 460 at 1080p in everything. And what ended up happening was this card got into the hands of so many people, especially overclockers, and they very quickly realized that the card was very much voltage limited. The way that NVIDIA had orientated and designed and sort of worked out the configuration of what the core under the 460 was going to be for that card, they did it in a way that meant that it was voltage starved, which means that was one of the limiting factors that meant that it could only run at a certain clock speed window. So the 460s were pretty much starved for voltage, and what this meant was as soon as you started adding extra voltage through programs like EVGA Precision or MSI Afterburner, or if you did it with like tweaking the BIOS, for example, on the cards, you could suddenly get a lot higher clock speeds and a lot higher performance. But the 400 series, NVIDIA did a really sneaky thing. They introduced a voltage lock on the card, which meant that even when you loaded up MSI Afterburner and tried to unlock the voltage control, there was still a maximum voltage that you could set the card to that was very limiting. And I believe it was like, from memory, it was 1.087 millivolts. And you couldn't go much higher than that on its own. But MSI, with their twin Frozer version of the GTX 460, did a really sneaky thing, and in their BIOS for that card, they unlocked the voltage cap that NVIDIA had set on all the cards. I don't know much more details about whether they could have technically got in trouble for that or not. I don't know. But everyone was very thankful that they did, especially 460 owners, because there was nothing special about the MSI version of the card, apart from the fact that that voltage lock was unlocked, essentially. So, because it was nothing different, it was a standard PCB, standard layout, nothing crazy, people realized that you could flash that BIOS onto any GTX 460 that ran at reference clock speeds and unlock the voltage on the cards, which meant that BIOS upgrade that you could do to the cards meant that you had up to, I think it was like 1.2 millivolts of headroom to overclock with, which was really, really nice. Without that BIOS, my two GTX 460s, I would say, were some of the most cherry-picked cards I have ever seen for overclocking. It was common that you could get a 460 on stock voltage to do around 800 to 850 megahertz on its own, but going above 850 megahertz, you had to start going up to that 1.087 limit on the V-Core. But to go much higher than, say, 875, 900 megahertz, you were running into a voltage ceiling on the majority of the cards that were on the market that people were overclocking with. And the two cards that I had would do 850 megahertz at the stock voltage and would do 980 megahertz with hitting that limit of the voltage, the 1.087 voltage. I realized, someone mentioned to me on a forum when I was posting the results about my card, they said, if that voltage is real, you should go and pick up the MSI custom BIOS that removes the voltage limit and just see how much higher your cards can get. If they're rock stable at 980 megahertz, I guarantee you they'll overclock to over a gig. And I was like, okay, sure. So I downloaded the BIOS, chucked it onto my two 460s, and well, one card at 1 point, I believe I didn't ever get to 1.2 volts because it was a little, even with reference coolers, by the way, reference air coolers, they were getting a little bit too hot for my liking. I didn't like cards to go above 85 under load. So I think I maxed myself out at 1.15 something or other, I think was my limit. But one card would do 1100 megahertz, 1100 megahertz. The second card would unfortunately max out at 1020, even with that same voltage limit. And I believe it did do 1050 megahertz if I did go up to that 1.2 volts, but it didn't quite go as high as the other one. Then I realized that I could overclock my 2500K really, really nicely as well. So my 2500K on reference clocks would do 4.5 gigahertz at reference clocks, and with a minor voltage increase would do 4.6 and up to 4.8 in winter when it wasn't quite so hot in the ambient Australian temperature underwater. So with that really nice overclocked 2500K, the two cards running in SLI in a really, really nice overclock configuration, these cards were screamingly fast. In fact, they were so fast that they outperformed a 580 when it launched later that year. So I'd paid less than $500 for two cards that were beating, at the time, a card that was worth around $800 Australian. And I believe I put my 3D Mark scores for 3D Mark 11 and 3D Mark Firestrike up onto the mods, EVGA Mods Rigs Hall of Fame. And for the 400 series 460s, I was top of the leaderboard for like 4 years until they finally got rid of the 400 series altogether, because I think they kept a cycle of like how many generations of cards back they would keep the scores for. And sadly, eventually the 400 series dropped off the radar. But I also held on to the 3D Mark Firestrike SLI 460 record all the way up until I believe it was like 2015 or 2016 or something like that, when someone finally beat my score with a 6950X CPU and two 460s. So I had an incredible experience overclocking with the 460s, and they were such good value for money for so many years. So that's the reason why I ended up going with the GTX 460, and why I've got a bit of a love relationship, I guess, in a way, with the 460. I was going to say love-hate, but I really can't think of anything why I hate the card, because to be honest, I really, really like 460s. They were such a nice card. So that'll be all for the video today. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I am going to be doing some more cinematic stuff for my future retro history videos, but it might be, it's going to be separate to how, I'm going to be doing it separately to how I do, doing it differently to how I've done it in the past. I'm going to be doing them as more single feature, like just a no talking sort of featurette of a particular video card, and then shortly following it I will usually do the very next video after that will then be the talking about that particular video card itself. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, guys. Farewell to Fermi. It's been a really awesome card in support. Of course, you can still use it. It's technically now a retro card, I guess, considering it's now got legacy support. But yeah, thanks for watching the video, guys, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.